So to summarize what this study shows us, I think it really reiterates the notion that depression is not a monolith. We see all the time in practice how patients present with a variety of presentations. In fact, we know there's over 200 possible combinations of symptoms that get us that disorder, major depression. What's been less clear is how those presentations have been linked differentially to underlying biology. What goes with that is that we see all the time that patients respond differently to medications that target different mechanisms, even though they have the same diagnosis. And so this study, I think, is consistent with what we're seeing in that we found that the epigenetic aging in monocytes using this new clock, monocyte age acceleration, showed differential associations when we looked at symptoms of depression that were considered non-somatic. So these would be cognitive and affective symptoms, so things like profound hopelessness, anhedonia, that inability to experience joy, pleasure, and feelings of failure, along with many other symptoms. It was sensitive to those symptoms, but we didn't see an association with more non-specific somatic symptoms. So these would be things like fatigue, inability to sleep, and just feeling like everything is kind of an effort, inability to get going. We didn't see that. So when we actually drill down and look at a symptom resolution lens of what symptoms people are experiencing, we see biological difference. And specifically in this study, having to do with the accelerated aging of monocytes. Well, we're not changing the criteria. The criteria for major depression is still the criteria. I think often as clinicians seeing patients in practice, we already tend to do this. We are able to look at their symptoms, rule out other possible causes, whether it's hypothyroid disorder or anemia, and determine that someone has major depressive disorder. Then we tend to look at what symptoms they're experiencing. At this point in time, we have some subtypes as part of the DSM, with anxious distress or psychotic features. Our findings aren't suggesting necessarily that, we change all of that subtyping, although I am aware that in the next version of the DSM-6 that's in development, there's talk about considering an inflammation subtype or inflammatory subtype of depression, and this would tend to be aligned with that. So it's not so much, I don't think it's ready for prime time yet. What we're seeing here is that folks that have distinct presentations are going to have different biological mechanisms at play. So the symptoms are really important. A lot of the scales that we have, and I've written other papers about this, a lot of the scales that we have, they really function as checklists because depression in and of itself is a multi-dimensional construct, meaning that we have symptoms that, we have negative thoughts, we have depressed mood, affect, feelings in our body, arousal changes in terms of our sleep-wake cycles and hunger cycles. So a lot of these scales, they ask about all of these symptoms, and they just add everything up as a total score. And really, the psychometric standards in the 21st century caution against this practice unless we can first show that these scales are considered unidimensional, kind of measuring the same phenomenon, but just looking at the severity. And the reason for that is because they should all kind of be measuring the same thing. So again, a tangible example might be, someone could have the same score at two different time points, but totally different symptoms. So it's misleading to think that necessarily their symptoms are the same over time. So I think a lot of caution is warranted when we're using these scales. I think we need to use, measurement-based clinical care more than it is what is probably commonly done, but we also need to have more precise tools. I think if we had tools that were able to measure these different dimensions in tandem, in fact, the PROMIS tools actually offer to do just that, where we can quantify someone's fatigue and someone's depressed mood and someone's anxiety all at the same time. We could actually really put together a better symptom constellation that's more personalized. And we would be able to really start exploring how these symptoms interact, because sometimes one symptom will present first that will kind of snowball into other symptoms where I'm feeling really poorly about just self-esteem, self-worth. I got laid off from my job. This is impacting my ability to sleep. Now I'm feeling fatigued. Now I'm not performing as well at work, and kind of on and on it goes. It doesn't all necessarily just manifest from the single source the way that potentially another kind of illness might, like if somebody has a pulmonary embolism and they have different symptoms across different systems of the body, it's all pointing to this one specific thing that's going wrong. And I'm not sure that that is really the case with depression. I think it could possibly be an interaction of a lot of these things, but our tools make it difficult for us to test these alternative theories of depression. I love this question. I think it's a really important question. This was a cross-sectional study. We did it at one point in time. And the science on how quickly just the epigenome in general changes is still very new. We're still trying to determine, over what period of time, if we make changes to someone's lifestyle, diet, medications, whatever, would we potentially see worsening or reversal of age acceleration? So I think we have to answer that question first before we can really understand if it's state or trait. I'm inclined to say, unlike things like gene expression that change much more rapidly in response to an intervention, DNA methylation is a little bit more stable over time. And, the population that we were focused on in this study, they have quite a few, risk factors, just having very complicated life contexts in that women living with HIV tend to experience many social factors that put them at increased risk for depression and other chronic comorbidities. And this kind of really dovetails with the idea of biological weathering, in that, your social context can get under the skin and accelerate your risk for many age-related conditions. And we think that depression also fits under that umbrella here as well.